But one thing, you and I were in a comment section, and I can't remember whose post it was, but it was something, regarding like the cynicism online. I'm like,
I would like to talk about that.
I've dealt with it. So, but I listened to this podcast that you did, and I think it was recent, this Businesses Bloomin' podcast.
Uh-huh.
And you had a point on sort of art versus product or commerce, right?
Yeah.
So art being for you, it's not necessarily audience focused, whereas product or commerce or content is for the audience. It's for an intended purpose. Yep. And you mentioned designers specifically being frustrated when they kind of confuse those two concepts.
Yep.
So can you explain more about this idea?
Yeah. The reason why for context for anybody listening, I have been doing product design and marketing for like 20 some years now. Unfortunately, I'm that old that I can say that. I used to think that maybe it would make me sound important when I could one day say that. Now I think it just makes me sound old. But one of the things that you see a lot in people who are designers is just this like deep frustration that they feel on a day-to-day basis. And some of that I think is valid, because I think people, creative people are not easy to manage, for one, and I think also just different to manage. So I think oftentimes they're managed really badly, and so there's some legitimate frustration there. But beyond that, I think a lot of them didn't get what they signed up for, meaning that the reason they got into design is because they wanted to be artists. Like they like expressing themselves and creating things, whether that's, graphics or, clothes or, videos or whatever it is. And so then there's this sort of, I think, a little bit of a rude awakening when they realize that nobody wants, if I'm hiring you, the designer, I don't want you to make what you want. I want you to make what I want. Like, I'm paying you to execute on my idea. And of course, to varying degrees as a designer, sometimes your input, may be welcome or maybe even will be super valuable. But other times, for example, I worked on a lot of stuff for Procter & Gamble, like Tide and Febreze and Swiffer and stuff like that. Not as a designer. I did like product design strategy for them. But I worked with all the designers, and the guardrails on that are very narrow. If you're working on something like Febreze, the brand is established. You can maybe have a little bit of wiggle room on that, but there's not much, down to how many, millimeters of space there are between the logo and anything else. Like, that's all in the brand guidelines because it needs to be consistent. And so what you see from a lot of people who are designers on that is they feel this deep sense of frustration because they got into this thinking that they're going to be able to express themselves creatively. And what they found is that lots of times the job is really just being a pixel pusher, essentially just executing within the very tight guardrails that have already been established. And so, they get pissed off. And I felt that way when I was a designer at some point, which is part of the reason why I stopped being a designer. Because I was like, oh, this is not really, most of the time, this isn't really a creative job. Most of the time it's just pushing the buttons, like at Abercrombie. I also worked for Abercrombie Fitch as a designer. And the people I worked with there were so insanely talented. Like, to this day, they're the best designers I have ever worked with, and it's not even close. I mean, these people were just ridiculously talented. That someone would come over and be like, "Hey, Matt, can you do a watercolor painting of like someone, by the ocean looking at a seagull like this?" And he's like, "Yeah, okay." And he would do it in like half an hour, and it's fucking amazing. And like, that's insane. And then, it's some 24-year-old merchant. It's like, "I don't know, her leg looks kind of lumpy. Can you redo it?" And you're like, bro, do you understand what this guy just did in like 20 minutes? He just did an amazing watercolor painting, and you're just like trashing his work, which I understand because, at the end of the day, we're here to make a product. But at the same time, it's like this person spent so many years building this skill only to find out that actually it's not really valued. And your creative input is not valued. And in many cases, that's not always true, but it's true in a lot of cases. And so I think that's the source of the frustration for a lot of people is they thought they were here to do art. And what they, realize is they're a cog in a machine, and their job is to produce pixels as ordered by whoever pays whoever owns the budget.
It seems like there's a difference between art and creativity, though, because I feel like there's still room for creativity. It just has to fit into the need that, you're trying to serve. So for full context, we run a content marketing and SEO agency. And we work with writers, so sometimes designers, but mostly writers who come from the creative background. And oftentimes I have to basically reel their kind of cleverness back, right? Like there will be a very like editorialized headline, and I'm like, actually, what search engines and algorithms need is a list of the best 10 tools or something like that. So I'm like, okay, tone it down a little bit. But then there's creative problem solving, I guess, within the content itself that you can still invoke. It just can't be avant-garde, so to speak.
Right.
So it's almost like that creativity could be put to an A/B test, and maybe it doesn't win in terms of like what you wanted to win, maybe didn't win, but I feel like there's still room for that kind of creative mindset, if that makes sense.
That does make sense, but I think that's probably not how a lot of people in creative jobs see it, right? And I understand why, because what they want to do is express themselves through words or pictures or videos. And, that's not generally what the job is. And so I think, to me, I like creative problem solving. So that's why I switched to doing marketing, because that's sort of more along the lines of what you're talking about. Is like, to me, what's fun, what gets me up in the morning is being intellectually stimulated. And to me, like the most fun, interesting, hard problem to solve is to make something and then convince people that it's so valuable that they will give you their money or time for it, because those are the two most valuable resources we have. So if I can make something and I can describe it and market it in such a way that you're willing to give me money for it, I think that's super fun.
So creating content on YouTube, 2 different channels, right?
Yep.
And then LinkedIn, you've got a newsletter.
Yep.
Do you ever feel this conflict or this rift between what you want to say, what you're passionate about, and what the algorithm kind of dictates you should say or how you should say it?
Well, let's remember that the algorithm is a proxy for the audience. The algorithm gives the audience more of what they want, and what they want is expressed by by their actions, right? So we've all seen this on YouTube or any other platform. If you click on something, let's say whatever, for you're looking up a recipe for, I don't know, chocolate chip cookies on YouTube, and you watch a video about chocolate chip cookies, and now for the next week or something, you're going to be getting served videos about chocolate chip cookies because you watched an entire video about it. And so then the algorithm says, all right, I guess this guy likes chocolate chip cookies. So I think it's important to understand that the algorithm is not some like magical beast that's like deciding for whatever reason to suppress, if only, fuck Alex. I'm gonna squash his dreams.
It feels personal at times, yeah.
It does, but it's not. It's all it is giving the audience what they want. That's all it is. And so you can blame the algorithm all you want, but what you really need to do is face reality. Is what you made is not what people want, and that just is what it is.
Well, I think that's the piece that I had come to specifically on LinkedIn. LinkedIn as a channel has been annoying for me because on one hand, I know that CMOs hang out there, VPs of marketing hang out there. So it's like a very cool place that you can just like write organic content and reach your intended audience.
Yep.
But then the formatting to me would dictate maybe shorter form, a hook up top. And I don't know, like I was trying to fit all this nuanced long form, kind of complex, like you would write in like a long form article or newsletter. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people that I follow were like, you should be passionate, you should be authentic and be you. And I tried to do that, and it was just like banging my head against the wall. And then I started maybe thinking about it more from code to crack. And I'm like, all right, let's look at this more pragmatically, right? I don't have to be cynical about this. I don't even have to be passionate about this, but I have ideas that I want to say. I want to be in the public conversation, and I know this is important for running my business. So let's figure out a way to make this work. And then I can actually give myself a little bit less pressure to be like my 100% authentic self. And I can still have fun with it, so to speak, in that way.
Well, I mean, is anybody their 100% authentic self in any situation ever?
No. And that's an interesting point. Right. I actually wrote a whole essay on that, the lossiness of the word authentic and how it's kind of overused and overapplied in multiple different scenarios. It could mean honest or human or... Right. I mean, who knows what it means.
Like when your girlfriend's trying something on at the store and she's like, oh, what do you think? Do you like this? You lie and say yes.
And we all have versions of ourselves, right? Like you're different, on YouTube than you are with your friends, than you are with your wife, right? It's like we all have kind of those different versions of ourselves.
Right. Yeah. So what specifically would you like to say on LinkedIn that you feel like you aren't able, to do because it doesn't serve your business?
I think for me, I really enjoy writing long form newsletters. And it used to be blog posts back. I worked at CXL back in the day. And, I would write like a 4,000 word article on A/B testing, and I could really dig into the weeds and, cite sources. So that's like just personally, like if we think about the process itself, void of any outcomes, that's what I enjoy.
So specifically length or nuance, because those are two different things.
I think more so the nuance.
I think so too.
Yeah. And I think probably skill wise, like short form copywriting is a little more difficult for me.
Yep.
So it felt like I had to maybe learn something new to fit into that new format.
But this doesn't sound to me like so what I'm just questioning an assumption here. It doesn't sound to me like LinkedIn is preventing you from doing this type of content. It just sounds like you need to maybe tweak your execution a little bit.
Yeah, or sharpen up a new set of skills.
Yeah.
But I will say one thing that, and maybe this is my imagination.
And the reason I say that is because I know lots of people who make some extremely fucking sophisticated content on LinkedIn. Like I would say, as far as like business content goes, there's nowhere you're going to find more sophisticated content than LinkedIn, other than maybe some like very niche newsletters.
No, that's true. I think one thing I had felt in the past was maybe that the algorithm / the audience wanted to read hot takes and maybe short, flashy, sensationalist stuff. Of course they do. And that was a point that I reached. Yeah, totally. And but what I realized is I don't necessarily have to appeal to that. Even if my audience is smaller, it's probably reaching the right people. If I maintain that voice and that sense of nuance, I don't have to necessarily chase the hot takes all the time.
So here's the thing. This is getting to something I've been thinking about a lot in the past couple months. So let's think about it this way, that one of the ways we could define our own psychology is whether you are a realist or an idealist. Meaning, if you're an idealist, you believe that the world should be different than what it is, and you would like to change it. And you can imagine this like a slider in an RPG. On the other side of that, you have you would be realism, which is you just accept that the world is the way it is, right? And you're like, oh, I don't know, I don't make the rules. And I'm not saying one of those is, there's no value judgment attached to that. These are just ways we could find it. And like, I would be very far in the realist side of it, where I'm just like, well, I don't know, just is what it is. There are other people. I would say most creative people are further like on the idealist side. Like they would like the world to be a certain way. And I understand, again, I'm not attacking that, just observing it. The other way we could define it, have you ever heard of the concept of locus of control?
Yes, for sure.
Yep.
Also, did my microphone change?
Yes.
Okay, just give me 1 second.
Sure.
Locus of control. I don't know what happened there. Locus of control. I think I might have to pause the recording real quick.
Sure.
Sorry. Yes, locus of control.
Another way we could define our own psychology is the idea of locus of control. I know you said you'd heard that before, but for anybody who hasn't, basically what that means is where do you believe that control over your life lies? Do you believe that you can either have an internal or an external locus of control? If you have an external locus of control, you believe that things outside of you control your fate, other authority figures, blah, 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 when you were born, astrology, whatever it is. On the other side of it is an internal locus of control, which is, by and large, you believe that you have control over where your life takes you. Of course, any of us could get struck by lightning or get cancer or whatever, but even then, like, maybe not if you get struck by lightning, but other than that, you have control over how you respond to a situation. And generally speaking, if you look at like psychology literature, having an internal locus of control is positively correlated with life outcomes. People are happier, make more money, have more stable relationships, blah, blah, blah. Now, a lot of creative people have an external locus of control and they are idealists, which is a tough combo because now you deeply believe the world should be different than the way it is, but you don't believe that you have the power to change it. And so you're basically just pissed off all the time because you're like, the world fucking sucks and I can't do anything about it. And that's just a tough way to live. It's a tough one. And that, I think, is the source of a lot of the reason why I don't get along with those people.
Yeah, and I do think there's something to maybe the capricious nature of like online culture too. Maybe like people don't understand why the algorithm favors this thing,
because
or
it's
that
very
thing.
technical and
So
it requires
they think,
you to understand both technology and business to understand, rule number one of economics is that people respond to incentives. So if you understand the incentives of this system and you understand the technology a little bit, it's obvious to you why it works the way that it does. But most people are not systems thinkers and do not want to invest the time and energy into understanding these things.
But from that pragmatic standpoint, you had a great essay, I think it was on your email list, about why you chose to be online anyway, like why you chose to start the YouTube channel, this feeling of being invisible and not wanting to be invisible, right? Can you explain that? I think that's very powerful. There's some leverage, there's some influence there. Why do this stuff at all, basically?
The long and short of it, which I'll explain in more detail, but the long and short of it is that what you'll see in life in general is that largely, oftentimes, opportunities go to people who are visible, not necessarily to the people who, quote unquote, deserve them. And I put that word in quotes because, again, I think that's kind of an idealist thing. I think, who are we to decide who deserves what? But I think you understand what I'm saying. So for me, the situation I found myself in is like I had done a lot of things in my career that I think were pretty cool. I mentioned some of those brands that I'd worked with and for, also did stuff for like Nike and Nintendo and Red Bull. And I made videos for like Element and Rockstar and DC and blah, 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 lots of things that people would think are cool. Or at least I thought were cool. And I think I did good work for them. And I had a lot of skills, I was like a pretty good designer. I wrote code for a living for a couple of years back in the days of the lamp stack and stuff and blah, blah, blah. But nobody really cared. And nobody knew who I was. And I had very little success. Anytime I tried to get a job, just kind of went nowhere. My network wasn't good. I just felt very kind of invisible. And it didn't feel good. Not from a perspective of like, I want validation, because that doesn't motivate me. More just like, as you said, on a pragmatic level, I'm like, this is scary. I feel shut out from the system. Well, let's put it this way. I am not a great fit for the sort of traditional, recruiting pipeline of getting a 9-to-5 job, because I didn't understand how it works until I was too old and I fucked up my resume, basically. I'm not a great fit for that. And if nobody knows who I am, then I'm afraid that I'm going to be one of these people who's really smart and good at what they do, but just sort of ends up being unsuccessful in life because they couldn't figure out a way to coexist with, the system. And so I realized that I needed people to know who I was in order to sort of get out of this hole. And so that's why I started my YouTube channel, and it worked.
I like that you took the term deserved out of it, because I think that removes the sense of like moral indignation or any sense of like
value judgment.
Idealistic value judgment. I saw on LinkedIn a while back this post from a guy. It was more of a rant about how in-house marketing teams should not have to justify their existence, but more so, we shouldn't have to do internal marketing.
Okay,
for
then don't
ourselves,
do it.
For our campaigns, they should just.
We should.
Thank you. Exactly. I was
forever.
like, dude, magic wand, like 100%. I totally like. I wish I lived in that world.
Take me there, please.
But like, exactly. Well, that's the thing is like, there's also like a real reason you have to do so. Like when I worked at HubSpot, certainly at a startup, if you're doing your own thing, like go do what you want. But when I was at a company with thousands of employees, like nobody has 100% clarity on what everybody's doing and the expected value and the outcomes. So there's a whole bunch of competing priorities. And if you're not able to make your case, then why would somebody just magically think, oh, I should trust them?
Because you're the main fucking character in the movie of the universe. That's why. Because Alex is the most fucking important person in the whole wide world. And if your feelings aren't validated in the exact way that you want them to be validated, then something went wrong.
We always try to tell our team now that like this whole, like there's the work, right? Everybody knows the work. It's the design, the product management, and even product management is so like, there's so many layers to it. But included in the work is the non-work, right? All of the meetings and
which
the stakeholder
is 80%
alignment.
of the job.
I tell people now, I'm like, that's not even like this shit that you have to deal with on the side.
The entire
that
job.
Is the job.
Yes.
So I guess like this personal branding plays into this idea that it's not necessarily, it's not something in addition. It's not something like extraneous. It actually gives you kind of more credence, more power to be more visible. And it's not, it's not like a moral thing. Like it's like, it makes sense that nobody would see you because you weren't
why would they?
visible in the places they were looking.
Why would any, I mean, Why would you? Yeah, it's like anything else in life. It's a system, and if the inputs don't change, then the outputs aren't going to change either.
You focus on LinkedIn and YouTube primarily, right? When you're helping okay, cool. Why those two platforms specifically?
Because I think that those two, there's lots of kind of tactical, like kind of specific reasons for it. But broadly speaking, if you're in B2B or you sell professional services, for the most part, LinkedIn is the best place for you to do that. So that's sort of the practical reason for it. Also, I think if you want to create, like you were talking about the kind of content you want to make, like nuanced, sophisticated content about business, LinkedIn is the only place you can get an audience for that, period. Nowhere else. And that's the content I like the most. So I just personally enjoy LinkedIn the most. Like that's where I feel like I can be my authentic self. And I think it's a great opportunity, again, for anybody who's in B2B and wants to build a personal brand or sell shit to those people. YouTube, I think, is sort of the flip side of that, where if you want to build a consumer brand or build a thought leadership brand at scale, I think YouTube is the best place to do that for a few reasons. The main one being that first of all, it is the biggest platform. It has, I think, 2.7 billion MAUs now. And people spend on average like 28 hours a month on the app. I mean, it's crazy. It has the distribution engine there, the recommendation engine on the homepage is amazing. Probably not quite as good as TikTok's, but it's pretty close. And I'm not really a big believer in short form video for lots of reasons I can talk about. So basically, I think long form video is the best way to build a personal brand out, in the sort of B2C world or, consumer world in general. And YouTube is the place to be for long form video. So I like it.
Why aren't you into short form video?
There's a couple of reasons. Number one is it doesn't make any money, so for example, I have a couple shorts with, say, 500,000 views or something, and I'll make literally like $25 from them. Now you might say, well, I don't care about directly monetizing whereas if I got 500,000 views on a long video, I'd make, $2,000 to $6,000 from it. But you might say, well, I don't really care about monetizing my videos because, I'm here to build a brand and sell some other service. Totally cool. I get it. But there's still a lot of problems. Number one is that short form content, it's much harder to build brand that way. And think about how, because it's very low intent and low engagement. So think about the way that people consume short form content. It's just like swipe, nope, yes, nope, yep, nope. Right? They don't even really know what they're watching. They give it maybe like 3 seconds or something of their attention before they decide whether they like it or not. And they oftentimes don't even know who they're watching. So you can imagine if you go on TikTok, I'm sure like I saw some girl, her thing is like pressure washing shoes, like taking these like dirty shoes and pressure washing them. And now they look all sparkling and clean. Right? Now you can imagine watching some of her videos for half an hour. And if I was like, cool, what's her name? It'd be like, I don't know. Right? So
Yeah.
they don't build brand as well. And of course, it's a lot harder to tell any kind of a nuanced, sophisticated story in 30 seconds or 60 seconds than it is. Like the average watch time on my videos is 9 minutes. You can say a lot in 9 minutes, right? They also, it's much harder to drive people off the app from short form content. So if you want people to download your lead magnet or buy your product or something like that, unless it's a physical product you have set up with TikTok Shop or YouTube Shopping or something like that, then it's very hard to get people off the app. Whereas with YouTube long form content, the whole, link in the description thing, that's a pattern that everyone knows and it works and it drives lots and lots of traffic. So that's an advantage. And I don't necessarily think it's all that much more work either, because if you've ever tried making like a high quality short, or, TikTok or something like that, you could spend 5 hours on a 45-second video. No problem.
I almost think it's harder. We've tried a little bit, a miniature experiment into doing short form on TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube for the podcast. Maybe we didn't execute the best, but we saw the same thing where it was like it would get a lot of views and just nothing would happen for our podcast downloads, or like it was very flash in the pan. But to your point, it was very difficult to find the right moments that would feasibly go viral. It was very difficult to put the captions on, the branding, make it like flashy and fast, like, in that format. So like I definitely, that resonates with me. So YouTube, do you look at YouTube as a platform for your own business, or is it fully kind of differentiated? Like LinkedIn, you're writing about personal brand building, audience building. It's very much focused to what you offer service-wise. Punk Rock MBA, you mentioned not doing any business anymore. You've got your own personal channel. Do you look at YouTube as a customer acquisition channel at all?
I mean, there are people, I've always had my LinkedIn profile linked in the description. So there's, I don't know, probably several thousand people who ended up following me on LinkedIn from my YouTube videos. And I have, ended up working with some of them as clients, but I don't try to force that, because people that watch my YouTube videos are there to hear about, millennial nostalgia music. They're not here to talk about personal branding, and I'm not going to try to force that on them.
Sorry to interrupt, but I was like, the Venn diagram here is probably like me and Shiva.
Right.
I saw you did his podcast.
There are a few people, and they're awesome.
Yeah.
I love them. But there are a small number of people, and I'm not going to try to I have tried, like I made some ads for, my coaching services and put them on my YouTube videos, and just really got very little, on videos that got hundreds of thousands of views. I would get a handful of leads, and maybe one of them was actually my ICP. So I was like, okay, this is just not a fit, which is fine.
Do you think it's possible to build up equity across platforms or transferable
100%,
equity?
Yes.
So if oh really? Oh, so it does transfer over if you wanted to do LinkedIn plus Instagram plus LinkedIn.
In my case, no, because I didn't go into this like if I was to start over now, knowing what I do, I would do things very differently. But I started this in 2017, and I just didn't understand a lot of the sort of strategy that I do now. But yes, it's totally possible.
I'm curious, how would you do things differently if you could start over again?
I originally started my channel. It was called the Punk Rock MBA, and I was sort of emphasizing the MBA part, right? And so I was talking about business, and it really kind of didn't get anywhere for a few reasons. Main one being that I just didn't understand how to, at the end of the day, YouTube is a consumer entertainment app. And people are not going there to hear about CAC to LTV ratios and shit like that, right? People on LinkedIn will talk about that all day long. You can get in a knockdown, drag out fight about payback periods and LinkedIn content or comments, right? Which is awesome. Not going to work on YouTube. People don't know, like 1% of 1% of people on YouTube know what LTV is, right? Which is interesting because CMOs are on YouTube. I mean, it's 2.7 billion users. Everybody has a YouTube account, but that CMO, when they're opening up the YouTube app, they're not in CMO mode. They're watching something about gardening or Formula One or whatever it is that they're into, right? So I just didn't understand that you sort of need to package everything in the context of being, entertainment. And so I gave up on talking about business content after maybe 6 months or something like that, and pivoted to music, which ended up working. In hindsight, I now understand how I would repackage business content in a way that's YouTube friendly. And then I think there'd be more alignment between, what I do on LinkedIn and what I do on YouTube. The LinkedIn stuff, I think, is always going to be a little bit more, niche and technical and substantial, just because that's the nature of the platform. But they could be a lot closer than what they are now.
Yeah. And I think I have seen business content on LinkedIn, but I think the audience probably is YouTube, overall smaller on YouTube. Yes. But yeah, I guess it's not going to hit the same demographic or the same audience size as a video about like the rise of Green Day or something.
For example, look at Lenny's podcast on YouTube, like, respect to that show. It's like, obviously the GOAT in that space. And, he gets like 15,000 views on a lot of them, 15,000 views with, on an interview with like, the founder of Figma, like an elite top dog guest. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that as a guest. And it's 15,000 views because guess what? People on YouTube aren't going there to hear Dylan from Figma talk about, go to market.
Totally. From a personal brand standpoint, on your approach to YouTube, we were talking about this before I hit record, but you mentioned that you don't introduce your own kind of personal opinions on the Punk Rock MBA anymore. And you've got your personal channel, which I'm guessing you probably push more of that to that channel.
Not so much.
No? What's your approach, generally speaking, now? And why did you stop putting your personal opinions in
there
punk
are
rock MBA.
Some people who, so the advice that we hear from a lot of people is like, well, just be yourself, right? And that works for probably most people, but it does not work for me in this context, because I am very different from my audience in pretty much every way. So it's just not really an option for me, because if I say my authentic opinion, people are going to get really mad. And that just wouldn't serve me. It wouldn't serve them. You know, the only option there would be if I wanted to be a rage bait channel where people just like hate watch. And I don't have any interest in that, because and I don't think anybody should have interest in that, because it's horrible for your mental health.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was going to ask about mental health. You mentioned that being a non-work interest. And there's something, so I chatted with Kyle Chayka a couple months ago on the podcast, and he wrote this book about basically how algorithms have not just influenced our online life, but they've kind of come out into the real world, right? Like coffee shops all look similar because they have to have this Instagram aesthetic, and your Spotify playlist. It's like, you don't actually get like a curated playlist anymore. It actually includes all of your past listening history. And I think for creators, there's this concept of like maybe adhering too much to what you think the algorithm wants, to what you think the audience wants. And then not only that, but the constant and instant feedback from the audience, right? And I'm sure you've built some buffers around that, but can you explain more about how you conceptualize like mental health in the context of being a visible online persona, which to me seem like they could be at
I think they're definitely at odds. Let's put it this way. The most famous people in the world, do they seem like happy, healthy people to you? I don't know any of them personally. I know one person who's like actually mainstream famous. He seems relatively happy, but the human brain is not meant, like, I don't think our firmware does not support, as you said, instant feedback from thousands and thousands of strangers all day, every day for years. Like that, our firmware was not designed to support that, I don't think anybody would say that being a creator is good for your mental health. It's not. And that's the hard part of it. Number one is, you get all that feedback, and even if it's positive, at least for me. So, I'm obviously autistic. And for me, getting any kind of like intense emotion at all, whether it's positive or negative, is upsetting to me. You know what I mean? It doesn't actually matter that much to me whether it's positive or negative. I guess it's worse if it's negative. But, when someone writes me a novel on my DMs, like telling me how much they love some band or something, that's like equally irritating to me as it is when someone is just like, fuck you, you're ugly. If not, maybe more so. For me personally, I don't like being on the receiving end of like intense emotion of any kind.
But people do have that sort of parasocial relationship, especially if they see you through repeated videos. They feel like they start to know you. So then they send very personal messages where you're like, I have no idea.
And there's some yes, I don't get a lot of that because, my channel is not about me. You know what I mean? It's about other things and other people. So it's more like I get intense opinions regarding, the topics of my videos. But yeah, that part is hard for me. I don't love it. I don't feel LinkedIn. I don't feel that way on LinkedIn. Like LinkedIn, I feel at home. I feel like those are my people, and I love talking to people on LinkedIn. Like that's because, that suits my autistic temperament. It's like, okay, let's talk about payback periods. Like that's fun.
Well, and you've sort of alluded to the fact that you may enjoy actually like some of the debate within the LinkedIn comments. Like it's a little bit more substantial. It's more nerdy.
We're
I don't know if that's the right word, but it's like about the topic itself. We're talking about like analytics here. Like this is actually pretty interesting.
A conversation about how do we most effectively solve this problem. That's fun to me.
So do you look at YouTube? Do you have like a buffer? Like, do you depersonalize some of the feedback that you get? Is it sort of like, was it Ice-T said like post and ghost is kind of his concept? He's like, I post and then I don't look at the comments. Fuck y'all. That's for you.
I think that is sort of, on on the one hand, I think that's the right idea. On the other hand, from a pragmatic perspective, you need to know what your audience thinks, and what they want. So I don't know that it's realistic for everybody to do the post and ghost. Do I have a buffer for that? I try, but it's tough. I mean, to be honest with you, it's just tough. But I'm very different from my audience as compared to, for example, there's someone else in sort of my corner of YouTube named Nick Nocturnal. I don't know him super well, but as far as I know, like everything, like the version of Nick you see on YouTube, I think is 100% like who he actually is. I don't think he, hides or changes his opinions for YouTube or anything like that. I think that he's one of these people who can just show up as his authentic self, and the audience will reward him for that. And I think that's awesome. And for those people, it's probably, not as difficult of an experience as it is for me. That's how I feel on LinkedIn. I'm like, I just show up and sit, like, I just am who I am. I don't hide anything. I just say whatever the fuck I want, and it works out for me, And so there's this idea of like creator platform fit too.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense to me. I'd love to get into more of the nitty-gritty mechanics of how you maybe conceptualize, or like if you have any frameworks around like how you post, or like how you conceptualize your personal brand. And maybe we could talk about LinkedIn. I think that's probably more apropos for our audience, more B2B. So such a general question, but like, how do you even approach LinkedIn? Like, I know you said you do kind of whatever you want. You show up as yourself, but there's still a blank page.
Yes, but there's a lot more. Obviously, my autistic brain, there's a lot more, of a framework under it than that. But that is how it feels to me. Is like, I don't feel like I have to be a very constructed, contrived version of myself on LinkedIn.
Well, there's people who do this, like they'll be the AI guy, or like you niche down like even more specifically, and then post after post, day after day, you've got very similar templates, and you're trying to build a sort of cohesive narrative.
That's the way to go.
That you are the AI guy.
That's the way to go.
So do you have anything like that? Did you sit down and say like, I want to be known for this topic, and this topic, and I'm going to write them in this tone of voice. I'm not going to, veer too far into like memes or satire or whatever that is. So what was that exercise like?
So it took me a few months, which is fine. I knew it would. So the first thing you need to do, and this is the process I use for my clients, and I use the same process for myself. So the first thing you need to do is figure out what your goals are in terms of business objectives. Meaning, I want, here's my offer. It costs this much money. I want to sell it to this many people per month, or, I have, 3 tiers of retainers. I want this many clients, blah, 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 whatever it is. Like, figure out how much money you want to make. Right. That's what it comes down to. And the reason why you need to do that is because the goals that you set are going to also determine a lot of the choices that you make in terms of the type of content you post and how often, blah, blah, blah. So in other words, if you have a course that's $79 and you need to sell 1,000 of those over the next year, to have a nice year, actually probably several thousand of those, right? Well, you need to create the type of, that's possible, but you need to create the type of content that is going to attract a sufficiently large audience that if you model that at whatever reasonable conversion rate, you're going to sell 20,000 courses over the next year. So you need to have a very large audience. On the other hand, let's say you sell, B2B SaaS, and it's some expensive, highly specialized thing, and you only need to close 3 deals a year to have a nice year. Well, that's going to take you in another direction. There's really actually it would be actually counterproductive to build a really large audience there, because such a small percentage of that audience would be qualified that it really wouldn't even make sense. So once you've done that, you sort of know which way you're going. Then the next thing you want to do is figure out basically what you said. So it's your positioning, which I call that your profile concept. So there's 2 parts of that. The first would be a 1-sentence description of what you do and who you do it for and why anybody would care. And that should be something that, if you described it, like, let's say you're at, a happy hour or something like that. And like, oh, have you seen Alex Burkett's stuff on LinkedIn? Like, no, what's that? And he's like, oh, he does blank. And they'd go, oh, that sounds interesting. Right. So that's what you should be looking for. And I think, it's sorry to interrupt, but is that different from like, let's say, I run my business Omniscient. We've got a tagline and we've got a value proposition. Do I have to create like a new, or I guess like a version of that for LinkedIn, given that maybe like the website's going to be a little bit more general? It's going to include,
startups to enterprises. It's going to include SEO to content. Like, it seems like maybe I would need to distill that a little bit more to something that people can grok right away on LinkedIn.
I mean, these are the exact type of conversations I have with people. So in your case, I don't, we would have to, that's potentially an hour-long conversation, right? Because those are the details that actually.
Just getting that free consulting.
Well, I mean, I would be happy to do that, but I know I don't want to run out of time. But like, those are the exact these details matter, right? Probably there is one offer. There's one ICP and one offer in your agency that's probably responsible for the majority of new business, where if we nail this offer with this ICP, then everything else is downstream of that. That's my guess.
I would think about that like almost a tripwire or like an entry point, right? It's like a beachhead. And then that to me, like, that has to be very understandable. It has to be lower friction. And then it has to be expandable into more, I guess, valuable, longer retainer type services.
So most people come to us because they need a new website, but then, we start talking about SEO and blah, 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 and it ends up being a retainer agreement or do such and such. And so I don't know if that's the case, but, if it was for your business, then I would say the thing that you would want to, and let's say most of those are like early stage B2B SaaS companies. And so then what I would talk about on LinkedIn, knowing that that's sort of the beachhead for your business, I would have that focus be something like, helping B2B SaaS companies, build high conversion landing pages or something like that, right? That's the type of that's the level of granularity, I think. So the way that I think about that is you want to say, what do you do it for? What do you do? Who do you do it for? And then follow that up with some demonstrated proof of your expertise. Meaning, like, and generally, if you can attach a big number to it, that's better. So, something like $300 million in revenue generated since 2014 or 75 clients since 2017, whatever the biggest number is that you can attach to it, basically, without looking like an asshole.
Is this all explicitly written like in your bio or in your profile, or is this more of a conceptual, just like in a document that I've got on Google Drive?
They can be the same thing, but sometimes they aren't. So they're ideally the internal and external facing version of it are the same, but sometimes they're not. But anyway, that's the first thing, and that's actually really hard to do for all the reasons you said, because all of us are multifaceted people, and our business usually has lots of, different dimensions and different offers and blah, 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 blah. But you have to pick one thing for one audience and focus on that, because people are cognitive misers and they're not going to allocate brain cycles to parsing you. If you're just some stranger on their feed, they're not going to do it, right? So you need to give them, as you said, for all the reasons you said, you got to give them something to bite on at the very beginning that opens up the door to everything else. So that's step number one. Step number two, and that's just to basically understand how are we differentiating ourselves from the rest of the world. And then step number two is the thing that's going to inform your content strategy, which is to come up with 3 to 5 of what I call belief statements, which are the things that you believe to be true about the world in general, but specifically about the things you work on. So let's think of what one of those things would be from you, because you're obviously a smart guy with some, nuance thinking about this. Let's say it's digital marketing. What's something you believe about digital marketing that would make your ICP kind of go, interesting?
It's funny you asked this. We just did a sort of exercise that we're still working through. So we haven't crystallized these yet, but we started the agency with the belief that content should be attributable from like a revenue and business outcomes perspective. Like content for content's sake, right? That's vanity. It's like bullshit. It's just motion, right? We're going to do content in a way that actually shows up on the top line.
Okay. So this is perfect. So the belief statement here would be that content should be attributable, which is really interesting, because there's when you say and you don't have to necessarily explicitly say these statements in your content. You can, but when you come up with these, all your content is going to reflect one of these statements in some or another in all your content. And this is interesting because there's 2 reactions that you want to get from your audience when you say this. Number one is you want people one of 2. So either you want people to say, yes, I've been trying to tell people this for years, right? And so you're sort of, validating the people who, who already believe this, and people that like, nobody will listen to me, but I'm saying this for years. The other reaction that you want to get is, I never thought about it that way, right? And if you get somebody to have either of those reactions, now you've got them on the hook, and now they look at you as a thought leader, which opens the door to everything else, right? And this is an interesting one because it's, I would say, you should never challenge the conventional wisdom for the sake of being a contrarian.
That's what I was going to ask next. Does it have to be contrarian and spicy?
But it has to be differentiated, right? Like, revenue is good. That's not an interesting belief, right?
Chart goes up.
Right,
yeah.
Of course, right? But something, but if you were to talk about quality of revenue, if you were to say something like, the biggest mistake that SaaS companies make is forgetting about quality of revenue. Something like that. That could start to be interesting, right?
Well, and I mean, you can splinter it off into more nuance or more like, I guess,
totally.
branching logic too. In this case, where it's like, I'm not saying it has to be last click, direct performance marketing attributable. I'm saying, hey, first click, linear marketing.
Exactly.
There's a lot within that too.
But I think that's a great one because the vast majority of people who are content marketers on LinkedIn are saying the opposite. It's like, hey, being, and I'm interested to hear this because I'm not. Yeah, I would say I sort of question the value of people who fixate on attribution modeling. But you're a smart guy, so you probably have good thoughts on this. But this is perfect because all these content marketers are going to feel challenged by that. But I think the CFOs and their
bosses are probably going to be interested.
Oh, everyone on my team says that's bullshit. You're telling me I can
yeah.
This can be okay. Tell me
that's
more.
Good. Yeah.
Right. So
so the contrarian thing's interesting because I wanted to ask too, this other point that we've been thinking through is almost like to your LinkedIn post the other day that I commented on, the non-hot take, hot take. We're seeing sort of everybody have these very black and white, like attribution or no attribution. And one thing that our agency has always stood for is what we say is basically we're strategists, not evangelists, right? We're not like, we're anti-backlink, we're anti-technical SEO. We're like, okay, so technical SEO doesn't matter most of the time until it does, in which case we're strategists. So we focus on what moves the needle.
Bad line goes
but
down.
I feel like that's so boring, isn't it? Like that's one of those things where like, of course you would be a strategist, right?
I would, well, yes, I would not. That's not good positioning. So we would need to work on that a little bit. But the idea is we come up with 3 statements like that, and ideally they sort of form a little bit of a narrative where the first part of it is you establish a worldview. You just sort of broadly say, this is my view on the industry. And at that point, people are either going to see that and be like, interesting, or fuck this guy, I'm out of here. That's okay too. Attract and repel. The second part of that, so it's basically like a funnel. The second part of it is where you're going to go into a little bit more detail about and establish yourself as an expert on that and really convince people that this is true and that you can execute on it, right? Is like, okay, you told me that like content should be attributable. I'm skeptical but interested. Tell me more. And then that's where in some of your other content, you go into detail. Like, look, it's not all like last click where I'm going to say, here, I made this blog post and it did this exactly, but I can tell you a little bit of story of like, here's what we think happened. If you look at these different models and, compare and contrast, it points us in a direction, whatever. I don't know. I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but like, that's where you get in a little bit more nuance there, or sharing frameworks like, okay, well, given that all attribution modeling, is a model, here's the different models you can use. Here's the pros and cons, blah, 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 and here's when to use them, when not to use them, stuff like that. And then ideally the bottom one is sort of, if you've gotten them to believe the first 2 things, if you also get them to believe the last thing, now they're ready to do business with you, right? And so ideally that's how it works. And so then once we have that, and this is what I would call the strategy part of working together. The second part is execution, which is where we make the content together. But this is where the meat of the work is, because this is the stuff that's going to make you stand out from everyone else. Is figuring out what the actual narrative is, what your beliefs are and why. And the content strategy is, is pretty simple. You think about the belief statements as rows in a spreadsheet, and then you think about the stages of the funnel as the columns in a spreadsheet, and then and then you figure out how many days a week you're posting, and you just fill it in, right?
All right, I have a few follow-up questions. First, would you be willing to say what your belief statements are for your LinkedIn approach?
One of them would be what I talked about earlier, which is that visibility oftentimes trumps skill in terms of creating opportunity. That'd be one of them. Another one for me would be that results matter more than feelings, because I'm a realist. And another one, maybe a third one might be that the people who seek the spotlight are the ones who deserve it the least.
Interesting.
And that's just a highly personal opinion on my part.
Yeah. There's almost I don't know if it's not necessarily a conflict, but between the first one and the third one, there's almost a little bit of a tension there, isn't there?
100%. Because the people that I want to work with are not people who want attention for it. And so all of this is designed, again, getting back to mental health, it's fucking destroyed my mental health to interface with people all day that just are fundamentally not my people. I'm not putting them down. I'm not judging. Yeah. It's just our brains do not work the same way. And so the reason I'm doing this is because I want to spend all day talking to people like you, where I feel okay, I'm not spending all my energy just trying to sort of align on a basic vision of reality. We're problem solving together, and we can have different ideas about how to solve the problem. That's cool. As long as I'm in that zone, I'm happy. If I'm just sort of arguing about the nature of reality, that's a little tougher. So there's totally a conflict between those two, which is the people I want to work with are not people I want to be famous. I want to be an influencer. It's more people
right.
Okay, I'm good at what I do, and I know that I have something that's valuable, but I'm realizing that in order for me to kind of take it to where it needs to be, I need to be more visible, and it's not necessarily, something that is in my nature. Please help me. And so then I can help them tell their story in a way that is powerful, moves the needle for their business, feels authentic, and also makes them feel better, because it feels fucking good to be able to share your story in an authentic way and get positive feedback. And that feels really good. And that's ultimately what I help people do.
I like how that ties together too. It reminds me almost of, do you know that book, The 48 Laws of Power? It's I think Robert Greene had said this, but he's people who are actually sociopaths don't need this book. I wrote it for the people who don't understand this stuff, so they can have these tools and models, so they can see the people who actually naturally
that's exactly
want power.
Yes, right? That's exactly what it is. And so this is the reason why I don't work with anyone who is a musician, because they just want attention for the sake of getting attention. And I can't help you with that. That's not how my brain works.
And the other people are probably going to have more rich ideas to work with in the first place, because they're kind of concerned about the substance anyway.
Exactly. So that's what I want to do, is basically help people who I would consider to be sort of underappreciated, smart people be visible and get the opportunities they deserve, is ultimately what I'm here to do.
That's cool. I have one more question on the LinkedIn game. So, and maybe this is a little too nitty gritty, so let me know if so. So you've got the pillars, these beliefs. That makes sense to me, your point of view. One thing that or one mental model I have is sort of patterns or cohorts or groupings, content groupings. So with SEO, I can say, all right, this is a listicle. The intent of this is a list of options. This is what is post. This is an essay. And even in your YouTube content, I noticed that you have patterns, it'll be the rise of this band or the fall of this. You have different formats, and you kind of can repeat that. I don't necessarily understand which formats or which types there are on LinkedIn. Is that something that you help establish too? Are you okay, contrarian take, meme, case study, right? How do you think about
100%. So for example, lots of times one of the content types that does well for people actually on LinkedIn and YouTube, we just sort of there's differences of how I execute, which I would call technical opinion, which is your expert opinion on a technical topic. For example, on LinkedIn, attribution modeling would be a great one for you, right? Of here's 3 different, ways of doing attribution modeling, here's the pros and cons of each. And that particular topic wouldn't do well on YouTube, but you could think about something that's a little bit more YouTube friendly, like, I don't know, different drop shipping platforms or different like print on demand platforms or something like that. Or even maybe a little bit bigger than that of like, hey, is drop shipping even actually still a viable business? Like that would be a technical opinion topic.
Is SEO dead?
Exactly. But that's sort of, I would say, a pretty basic one, but yes.
Nobody's ever said that before. Is SEO dead? Oh, this is a masterclass. Thanks, man. Would you want to do, I call them rapid fire questions. They're really just like premeditated questions, some having to do with marketing, some just fun stuff. What's a contrarian belief that you have, or what do you believe that most people would disagree with you on when it comes to branding or personal branding specifically?
I don't know if people would, well, okay. There's some people who agree with me on this. I was just thinking about this earlier is, I think, there's so many, I don't even know where to start here, but let's say this is that I think there are the biggest failure pattern I see with a lot of people is over planning, meaning that they're constantly stuck in a planning stage. Like, oh, I'm going to start posting content on LinkedIn or YouTube or anywhere else. I just need to read another book or get another camera or write this document. Like, no, you just need to fucking start posting shit and see what works and what doesn't. Yes, you should have some strategy, but 10% strategy, 90% execution. And I think people over-index on the strategy part because it's easier. It's a way to tell yourself that it's okay to stay in the shadows. Yeah. It's
a fear of failure, I think. We love the phrase, don't overthink it. We say it to each other all the time here. And that midwit meme, right? Exactly. Where it's like in the middle, you're frustrated. You're like, oh, semantic SEO. We're like, write stuff people like. So I take this question from Tyler Cowan. I love this one. It's like how a violinist or a musician, practices scales. Right?
Oh, you think musicians practice?
To stay sharp. Let's assume
in a fictional world where musicians
skills.
Practice.
What would that version of practice be to you?
Well, I've been making content since like 1994, and I've never stopped. So that's what it looks like for me. I mean, there's days where I write 10 posts, for myself, for other people, whatever. And so I just did a little back of the envelope math. Since I started YouTube in 2017, I've easily made 10,000 pieces of content, if you consider like a tweet, a piece of content, which I do. So putting in the reps, that's what it is. And, to go back to music, I mean, because of my day job and all that shit, I know lots of musicians, some of the best in the world. So there's a guy named Jason Richardson who plays in a band called All That Remains. He used to be in another band called Chelsea Grin and Born of Osiris and stuff like this. And the guy's probably the best like metal guitarist in the world right now on a technical level. And I remember, to make a long story short, he was telling someone else in another band that he was in, like they were like, "Hey, how do we get as good as you?" And he's like, "Oh, it's easy. You just he gave him these exercises. He's like, do this for 4 hours a day on top of the other stuff you already do."
Yeah.
And that's why Jason is Jason, because he's a fucking maniac.
It's getting the reps in completely. I think I read somewhere that you're in jiu-jitsu, you're purple belt. Yeah, that was one thing that I learned. I'm taking a little break right now, which, it's kind of ironic that I'm about to say this, but the coach always said, go to class. Like that's the only secret. You just show up, and obviously like when you show up, you're going to,
and it's not going to feel like you're getting better,
but there's no amount of YouTube videos you can watch to like, exactly. That was one thing too. I like woke up 4 months, 5 months later, and I'm like, oh, I know how to do things now. Wow. Just by showing up. So curious, I had another question here on your productivity function. So you'd mentioned creating all this content. It seems very natural for you. I'm not sure if that's the case, but what is your productivity function? Like,
that's it. Honestly, I don't have to try. It comes naturally to me. So I don't think I'm the right person to ask.
I mean, do you sit down? Do you just like have a blank page? Do you just like start writing? Do you have any like outlining? Do you preheat the oven in any way? Like, do you have a set time?
If I have an idea for a post when I'm like running or making lunch or something, I jot it down so I don't forget it. Other than that, I don't do anything else. This comes naturally to me, so I don't think I'm a good person to ask. Just be born autistic, and that's the answer.
All right. Who do you admire professionally and why?
Um, I the people I admire professionally are generally not public figures, because most of the time, I think in order to become a public figure on the level that anybody listening to this would recognize, there's usually something about that person that I don't that is not admirable to me. Not always, but including myself. I mean, I'm not fucking normal, obviously, and anybody that you see that is like exceptional at what they do to the point that they're a public figure that you would know about it, there's something fucking weird about them.
Like there's some trade-off that you wouldn't accept for the whole package.
And that doesn't mean they're like a
basically.
bad person or they're doing something shady. It just means like, I don't know, like they might be a mental health mess. Lots of them are. I mean, I would say I probably am. I'm definitely
burn themselves out, neglect family or whatever. Yeah.
God does not give with both hands. So for me, it's not that I don't admire, like I respect that, but like they kind of are just born that. I mean, all of us are born that way. This is a whole other philosophical conversation you could have about like determinism, I guess.
You want to talk about free will?
Exactly. I mean, is it all just, have you ever heard of Laplace's demon? So Laplace's demon is, I don't know, from the 1700s or something. This guy, philosopher named Laplace, posed a thought experiment of like, imagine there was a demon, and demon in his case, I don't think means like bad guy. It just means like sort of a, supernatural figure that knew the state of every atom in the universe throughout time. Could that demon predict everything forever? Right. And so basically it is a question of determinism. Like, are we all just a product of physics at the end of the day? Is sort of the central question of Laplace's demon. So that's sort of a I don't know. Obviously I'm not normal. I think about this kind of shit all the time. But what I admire are people like my dad, who he was a corrections officer for like 25 years. And just showed up, and my stepmom, his wife, also worked at the prison. Both of them just showed up to work every day, for 25 years, did their job, kept the bad guys locked in a cage. And then now they've got their state benefits and they're chilling. So I actually, I don't think I've known and worked with a lot of really exceptional people. And I don't think most normal people would want to live in the shoes of those exceptional people, because it's not fucking necessarily fun or easy to be that. So I respect people that are just kind of the normal, the unseen or underappreciated, just normal people in the world is what I envy that. Like, it'd be fucking nice to be normal.
Yeah, I agree. That's a great answer. What's a career choice that you considered but did not pursue?
At one point I thought about maybe joining the military, because my dad was in the Navy and his dad was in the Air Force, and lots of my other family members are in military and stuff, but it's actually kind of a shitty job. I think people in the military wouldn't disagree with me, I don't think. Law enforcement, also kind of a shitty job. Respect to the military and law enforcement people out there, lots of them and my friends and family, but it's just, unfortunately, it's kind of a shitty job, which sucks. I wish it wasn't that way. I also thought about, I found out about how PhDs work when I was like 29, which is a little bit too late. Not necessarily, but that ship had sailed. But maybe in another life, maybe I would have gotten like a PhD in marketing or something and been a professor, because you can make decent money doing that and it'd be fun.
Interesting. So like the research portion is what's interesting there, or what's the interesting?
I mean, I like
PhD,
developing and sharing ideas with people at the end of the day. That's what's fun to me. So I think that would be enjoyable. Yeah,
you've worked at a bunch of education platforms.
I've been doing that for 11 years.
And obviously like your own channels are very educational too.
So but that ship has sailed. It's cool. I like what I do now.
If you could create your own category in Jeopardy, what would it be? And would you get every question right?
No, I would not get every question right. I don't memorize. To me, memorizing trivia is a bad use of scarce resources. That's what Google is for. My category would be, I don't know, I don't even know. I don't know. Yeah, I'm bad at this. Just my brain doesn't work this way.
I feel like you've got to have some like punk rock history. Like you would be upper percentile or something. No,
that's the last fucking thing you would have to pay me literally like fucking $100,000 to show up for a day to do that.
That's amazing. All right. So this is a more complex rapid fire question, but I'm very curious about your answer. It's a hard question. What is the most overrated virtue?
The most overrated virtue. I think, so this is getting back to something we touched on earlier. I think that the media in general, social media in particular, I think rewards cynicism and sarcasm. And I think those are really terrible, toxic traits and behaviors. It's always this, everyone wants to dunk on each other and who can be the snarkiest and who can have the hottest take. And, basically, just be a more like cynical dick to the other person. That's rewarded a lot. And I'm not into it.
Yeah, let's maybe got a couple of minutes. Let's maybe dive into that just a little bit more, because that was interesting before we were recording. And I think we were also in the comment section talking about this too, about the allure of cynicism, right? It's very easy to be cynical nowadays. And I've found myself doing this at various times. And I think, to your point, social media can at least appear to incentivize it. So we do kitchen side podcasts in addition to interviews, and they're basically like just the founders shooting the shit, talking about things going on in the market, our own business, et cetera. And there was a while where I think we realized we were only reacting to other things, and we were only sort of tearing other things down. And I'm like, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to be constructive, if anything. And like, if we see a shit take on LinkedIn, let it go.
Okay,
like,
cool. Yeah.
I mean, if we can use it to like bolster one of our values or our points as inspiration, sure. But just to be negative, just to deconstruct something else,
you sure showed that guy
value.
Don't you feel better now?
Yeah,
no,
and
you don't feel better at all. You feel worse.
Yeah. Endless rabbit hole towards the bottom, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of this, I've thought about this quite a bit. A lot of this, I think, is a product of the media, like TVs and movies and stuff like that, where, that's sort of one of the characters that's considered cool is, the snarky person that, has all the great comebacks and puts the jock in his place and blah, blah, blah. And think about the type of people who write TV shows and movies, right? They're not exactly what you call like the cool kids. Yeah,
not
exactly. Not the Chad. Probably not the happiest, most normal people either. And so I don't think people really understand this, because I didn't think about it for a long time. But that's the class of people who sets the narrative in a lot of pop culture, is sort of this like cynical, snarky, kind of person who, oftentimes I think is operating from a place of insecurity, and frustration with the world. And I think we've sort of let them poison us a little bit. And obviously, another facet of that is just like the negativity bias is unfortunately part of the human firmware. So, meaning that we're conditioned, we're like hardwired to pay more attention to negative things than positive things. So you're going to get more engagement by talking shit than you will, by being positive. Not always, but, on balance. That's the way it works. So, again, getting back to economics 101, that people respond to incentives. If, getting likes is an incentive, which it is for a lot of people, especially if they sort of haven't thought about it enough to realize like, actually, maybe that's not the incentive, then you are incentivized to be a negative dick, I think, to be cynical and snarky and sarcastic.
Yeah. There was some philosopher, somebody who said a quote that I'm not going to remember at all, but it was something about how cynicism is the insecure person's version of cool. And there was some change in me that happened the last few years where I started looking at it as very uncool. And it was like the Emperor's clothes, right? Like I just started to see through it. And I'm like, this is insecurity in action. And I've replaced like, and now I see earnestness, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like you're just, you're fine.
That's
right?
why I love, a lot of these people that are criticized for being quote unquote corny, like say Russell Brunson from ClickFunnels, for example. I love him. I think he's awesome, and I love his message. And he's like a very heartfelt, earnest person that says, at least appears to be publicly, that says a lot of things like, yeah, I'm sorry, but if like, I don't know, if being a nice person who enjoys being with your family and wants to help other people start a business online so they can afford, like, help their family, if that's not cool, then I guess I'm not cool.
Nice. Well, this is a really cool way to wrap this up. Glad we did that one. Where can people find you online? Where do you want to point people to?
You can find me on LinkedIn. Just look for my name, Finn McKenty, FINNMCKENTY, or you can go to finnmckenty.com. Either one of those would be awesome. And I love talking to literally anybody that runs any kind of business, whether it is mowing lawns or, or SaaS. I don't care. I love talking to literally anybody about any business. So please don't be shy.
Nice. Well, thanks so much, man. This was super fun.
Thanks to you too.